Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 317, with Micah Sargent and Jason Howell, recorded on Thursday, December 7th, 2023, for Thursday, December 28th, 2023. Best of 2023. Hello and welcome to Tech News Weekly, the show where typically every week we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news, but this is the very festive end of the year episode where we look back. I am one of your hosts of this journey, Micah Sargent.
And I'm the other guy, real quick, after a couple of weeks of not being here, but here again, Jason Howell.
Hi, Jason.
Hi, Micah. Good to see you again. It's been so long.
It has indeed. By the power of movie magic, it has been so long.
Yeah. So in 2023, excellent year for the show. I think the thing that I really enjoy about this show is the opportunity to learn from the people that we pull on. And sometimes we get people who are like the source of the story.
Right.
And that's almost my favorite because you really get to touch on exactly why that news is important from the horse's mouth. And I would say our first clip really ties into that exactly. This was one of those opportunities that was like an opportunity for me to learn a little bit about the history of these things that, a lot of people probably take smartphones for granted. Well, Stu Tartarone from AT&T joined us not very long ago because he was there in the room when it happened many years ago, a few decades ago. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of cell phones and smartphones by extension. But really, when we think about a technology that has really kind of become so engulfed around what we do on a regular basis here in the US, around the world, business is driven by it. Personal lives are driven by it. The cell phone is incredibly important, to say the least. And the way that it's developed since it began, it's just really fascinating to me to get the opportunity to talk to someone who was really there in the beginning. Stu Tartarone was one of the engineers on the team at AT&T 40 years ago that helped develop the technology, the underlying technology of the first cell phone call.
Wow.
And I believe even has some props to show off as well. But Stu, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today about this. It's amazing to meet you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to meet you guys. And thank you for joining us here today in Middletown, New Jersey.
Oh, right on. It's wonderful to get you on here and talk to you about the history of something that I think it's easy to take for granted. And I'm super excited and super interested to hear kind of your take, which we'll get to in a little bit, about the progress, if we want to call it that, or kind of the development of the technology that you helped design and launch 40 years ago. But let's kind of start in the beginning and talk about what you were working on exactly, 41 years ago. When you were hired by AT&T, what were you tasked with exactly? How did that materialize into, what we have today, I suppose?
So I came to join a small team, but it was actually back in 1972, which is probably a little over 50 years ago, at Bell Labs, which has now evolved to AT&T Labs, to conceive the first cellular system. It's something that didn't exist before. And think about it coming out of grad school, coming into working on something that no one saw before, no one touched, and being foisted into this incredible team to develop and evolve it. So the first real job that I was given was to work on a market survey to understand if there was a market for this type of communication, which was initially focused on in a vehicle, not a handheld, and it was oriented more toward businesses. So we went out and we did a very professional market survey, hired a market research company to do it, questionnaires, live interviews, got to sit on the other side of the glass. And as a result of it, the conclusion was that there was no market for this type of technology back in 1973.
Okay, so no market back in 1973. And yet the decision was to kind of move forward with it. What was the rationale there? Like, I imagine with these market studies, you want to know, like, is their juice worth squeezing for? Like, is there a there? Like, how did that transpire?
Well, this is part of what we've always done at AT&T. Think about the transistor, information theory, charge coupled devices, solar cells. These are things that we thought would be important, significant for the evolution of communications. So we were fortunate to be able to move forward with it, understanding that, maybe no one saw a market today, but we really thought there was a huge opportunity moving forward. And fortunately, we had the support of our company to do that.
Yeah, no kidding. And the foundation around it. And I mean, clearly, like, I'm very grateful that things went the way they did, because I couldn't imagine our lives without that. It's so foundational, fundamental to what we do. Who exactly was this technology envisioned for at that time? Like you said, it would be in the vehicle. Is this... I mean, really, I imagine the answer is business folk. Were they even asking for something like this?
Well, nobody was really asking for it. And what I think it boils down to, sometimes people can't ask for something they don't see, they don't know.
Yeah,
in fact, the result of that market survey said people were very interested in more pagers and more modern technology pages, because that was the in technology at the time to communicate with people when they were distant from their homes or offices. But the focus was on the business market, because it was a vehicular service. And the notion of insurance people, in fact, our first commercial customer was actually, we had an insurance company being able to be on the road, communicating with their clients, communicating with their office, delivery people, craft people, maintenance people. That was the initial focus of why this technology was built.
And I believe that you have some sort of a prototype or something. The cell phone, is this the cell phone that you worked on initially that was inside of a vehicle? Is that, oh my goodness.
Wow.
Look at that thing. That's fascinating.
So
love it.
How cell phones were in those days is that in the car, where people sat and drove the car, this would be mounted on usually on the hump in the front of the car, in the back, wired in the back to a transmitter device and with antennas on top. And you could see quite, large compared to what we even see today. But one of the concepts that came into developing this was the notion that you would put your number in first, and then you would press this button called send, then pick the handset up, which wasn't how people used phones in those days. People would pick them up, they get dial tone, they get dial. And, this concept, think about this is how people make phone calls today, came out of our early planning.
Wow, that's so true. I honestly had not even thought of that. That yes, if I'm going to make a call, I would type it in and then hit the green button to start the call versus just and then that's wow.
Well, and especially to the time period that we're talking about here. Like you bring up a really good point. Like, I remember in my home, I was born in the mid 70s. I remember having in our home a rotary dial and not just a push button dial. So I have to imagine there were probably some prototypes of this thing that may have began with, in the realm of the rotary dial and yet, kind of progressed from there. This is super fascinating. And then once it was... Well, actually, let me take a step back. In order for this technology, like the actual hardware that you just showed off, to work, there has to be an underlying network for it to be supported on. How, like, what's the development of that look like at a time? Because I think about the now, and I just think about the immense amount of cell towers that are required everywhere in order to support the network. The demand that we have now, which obviously is very an insane amount higher than it was back then. What did that network technology look like 40 years ago?
So think about the concept of cellular. And we used to use an analogy that maybe today people don't relate to, is that the original mobile telephone systems that existed had an antenna in the middle of the city. It'd be broadcasting at high power. Whatever frequencies were used there couldn't be used from miles away. Just like in TV back in those days, Channel 2 could be used in San Francisco, could not be used until you got down to Los Angeles again. The concept of cellular, which comes from Doug Ring and Ray Young in the 40s, the concept came up was to take the available spectrum, use low power, and reuse those channels multiple times within a given area. And that's where you get the huge capacity out of that. But for that to happen, and again, think about it was a vehicular service, as cars drove around the city, you'd have to be able to switch them from one channel to another channel, a concept we called handoff. So what sat behind that network was a switching machine. AT&T and Bell Labs were first with the electronic switching, and a network of cell towers or cell sites, as we call them, and the communication. And one of the things I got to work on as probably my second job was distributed architecture. The distributed architecture between a switch, between cell sites, between mobiles. And one of the things that came out of this is one of the first systems to ever use message-based signaling. Which was just a huge advance in those days, and really made everything come together and work.
On your team, when you reached this milestone 40 years ago of the first cell phone call being made, like how significant did that moment feel at the time? Like, I have to imagine you wouldn't in a million years have guessed kind of the way things have progressed over the last 40 years. But in that moment, did that feel as significant as maybe we would look back now and place significance on that now?
Well, it was significant, but probably to us who worked on the system was probably even more significant was probably in the mid-70s. 1977, 78, when we were actually building and testing and trialing the system in Chicago. And probably the most significant moment for me was actually going out there and making the first call, picking up that handset I just showed you. And this is something we worked on for a number of years. And it was this huge high about actually being able to call friends and call family using that system. And if you fast forward from there to 1983, the significance of that was that now there was the go-ahead that we could start deploying this on a nationwide basis. So it was a big deal then, in that moment in time in October of 1983, but no one could have conceived what would happen going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those kind of milestones where you realize, telephone technology has been one thing for so many decades at that point. And then now this requirement of being tethered to a wall or a line coming out of a wall or something like that, that has the potential to not be there anymore. Here we are 40 years later, cell phone technology, like I said earlier, I mean, we've all got them and, we all take it for granted. Insane maturation over that time period.
Only 40 years and we've gone from that to this.
Yeah. And not to mention the miniaturization aspect. I mean, I have a phone in the other room. It's literally that small, and that's kind of its claim to fame is that it's a tiny cell phone. But what have been some of the more kind of surprising developments, milestones, things that you've noticed about this technology as it's evolved over time that have really stood out for you to be like, man, that's, I don't know that I ever saw that coming, but it's just got to be so cool that you helped create something that has had this much development and made such an impact.
There are two aspects. One is the devices themselves, and as you mentioned, the miniaturization of and think about the first portable cellular phones were this brick, which is heavy, expensive. Not something you'd stick in your pocket. The evolution of that phone to something that you can pick up now and everyone sort of has, to the initial handheld phones, to a significant moment that putting a camera in this device. Think about the big deal thing that happened with there. And I'd be remiss without mentioning the iPhone, which sort of set off this whole notion of, of connectivity. But and to that connectivity word, the other thing was, and people look at these devices, but it's the network that sits behind it. Yeah. The evolution from 1G to 2G to 5G, the ability to carry not just voice traffic, to go to digital voice, to carry data, and now to carry video over that. Those are some of the things that I don't think we quite foresaw, back in the day when we started working on this.
Well, yeah, indeed. And now, through exactly what you're talking about, I mean, a combination of we've got the hardware and we've got the hardware tapping into this very robust kind of wireless data network. Now we have the ability to do things that we probably, again, take largely for granted. That was pure science fiction, video calls, like actually being able to see wirelessly on a screen and talk with someone with very, ultra low latency over this wireless connection. I mean, that's just incredible what we've done, I say we, as if I had any part in this, but what you have helped kick off here.
And again, you never could have conceived that back in the day, but think about, sort of where we're going with this. And it actually buzzed, and one other prop I have here, this was, and it's hard for you guys to see this was the Alexander Graham patent. From 1876, which sort of set this all off. Yeah. And while it was in those days and today, it's the whole connectivity. And so think about what sits behind all these devices as they evolve. And the connectivity today, the seamless connectivity, whether it's from fiber in the ground, whether it's wireless, whether satellite, that really is a big deal that I think we see ahead of us, because that empowers everything that we do going forward.
100%. Stu, this has been an honor and a privilege to get to chat with you about this. Thank you so much for carving out a few minutes out of your morning. Well, I guess it's afternoon there.
It is afternoon. And thank you guys. And I want to invite you to come visit us in Middletown, because we have an incredible museum here, which shows 150 years of the spirit of innovation that has captured AT&T through all that time. Be a great live show for you guys.
There you go.
Come here and see that.
Yeah, I did actually see some clips and some stuff online about that. It looks like a fascinating kind of museum to pick through. So thank you for that, Stu.
Thank you so much.
Stu Tartarone, principal member of technical staff at AT&T. It's a pleasure, Stu. Very nice to meet you. Thank you for coming on.
Same here. Great to meet you guys.
All right. Keep up the great world-changing work.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, Stu.
Such a cool conversation. I was equally excited about this next story from Stephen Shankland of CNET, who took time to look at the secret life of the 500 plus cables that are actually responsible for bringing internet to the world. So cool. I was scrolling through the internet. Yes. A little bit ago now. And I was over on CNET and I came across this headline, and immediately was taken in. It's called, the headline was "The Secret Life of the 500 Plus Cables That Run the Internet." And I thought, I need to know more about that. And boy, howdy, did I learn a lot. Joining us today to talk about it is the author of the piece, Stephen Shankland from CNET. Stephen, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me on again.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to get to chat with you. And I'm, again, so happy that you and the team put this together. Before we do get into the story itself, I do want to know what led to the production of this piece. Like, what made you want to look into subsea cables? How did this come about?
Okay, I've been writing about internet infrastructure for decades, right? So I've always had sort of a high interest in this general technology area, but subsea cables in particular intrigued me. I've been actually wanting to write this story for about 5 years. I would hear of some new cable arriving or some other cable getting cut and it being disaster. The Tonga volcanic eruption a few months ago piqued my interest again. I finally had a chance to clear my schedule out, talk to a whole lot of people, and put this piece together. So I've been wanting to write it for a while, but the thing that actually got me to write it was Tonga, and then also curiously, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and then all the saber rattling with China and Taiwan, because internet infrastructure is really important, and now it's militarily vulnerable. So that's what got me to write it right now.
Yeah, kind of thinking about that aspect of it, the geopolitical, geotechnopolitical aspect of it is something else. Now, there's a lot to cover here, and importantly, folks, I am not going to let Stephen tell you everything about the piece because you need to go over to CNET and read it. But I do want to cover some of the highlights. Let's start by talking about the cables themselves, because when I was thinking about these cables, I'm thinking these are massive Mario Bros pipes that are running underneath the ocean from place to place. So let's tell the listeners what they look like, how long they can end up being, and what exactly it is that they do.
They are skinny. They're about the width of a garden hose, maybe about as big as my thumb around. I had a sample, I don't have it right here, but they're about that big across for the part that's stretched across much of the bottom of the ocean. Now, at either end of the cable, where they go across, closer to shore, they get beefed up, armored. They have thicker metal, steel housing, the armor around it that protects them against things like just people banging into them, ship anchors, a lot of other wear and tear. So they do get thicker toward the shore, but mostly they're actually really pretty skinny. They get very long, 20,000 kilometers, I think are the longest ones, 12,000 miles or so. That's huge to go across the Pacific Ocean. Many of them, of course, are much shorter. And right now there are about 870,000 miles of these laid across the surface, across the bottom of the ocean floors around the world. About 550 of them right now, either in operation or planned in the next couple of years.
My goodness. And what's inside of one of these cables? Like, what are the materials, at least, that are inside?
Well, of course, they're made up of several layers. Now, the most important one is at the very center. They're super thin fiber optic strands. So these are the same fiber optics that carry, information all around the world. But strangely, really came as a big surprise to me. There are very few of these fiber optic strands. Usually only 8 or 16. Most of the cables right now max out at 16, but various efforts are underway to increase that number. And the reason that there are so few of them is not because of problems with the cables themselves, but because every 50 or 100 miles or so, you have to boost the signal. And so inside these cables, every few, 50 or 100 miles, there's something called a repeater. It's a big sort of a thick section in the cable that boosts the light signals going through those fiber optic lines. And those repeaters need power. So that is what limits the length of the cable. And so outside the fiber optics, there's actually a little tube of copper, and that's what carries power to the repeaters. So the repeaters are kind of the limiting aspect of the technology right now, because you need those repeaters to boost the power, and you can't, to boost the data without those, and so you can't fit more and more, you can't fit enough strands in there without more repeaters. So it's power limited right now.
Right. Yeah. And I remember you talking about kind of the heat aspect of it, and it's sort of it's a really huge balancing act, right? Trying to figure out exactly what you need to do in terms of repeaters and power. And I mean, the kind of incredible amount of power where you mentioned that they can essentially, if they wanted to, they could provide power from one side of the cable and reach out to get all of the repeaters. Often, though, there is power on both sides just for redundancy's sake. That alone was kind of mind-boggling to me. Now, with all of that in mind, you've got thousands of kilometers, right? How much do these cables cost, and who the heck is paying for them? Is this something that Xfinity Comcast is covering, or is it funded by the government? Like, who out there is paying for these things?
Well, a few decades ago, it would be telecommunications companies, and the information you'd put over the cables would be phone calls. And now, of course, it's internet data that you're putting across these cables. And with that change has come a change in ownership. So it used to be the phone companies, national or private, would fund these cables, the construction of them and the operation of them. But now increasingly, it's actually the big tech companies, Google, Facebook, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon. These are the folks who have the huge data appetite to fund these cables. They cost a lot of money. So a new modern transatlantic cable, about $250 million to $300 million to design and install. They're not simple. They're complicated and expensive. You have to do site surveys. You have to buy a lot of equipment. You have to pay ships to lay the cables. So they're very expensive. But for these companies that have a lot of data centers and have to move data from place to place to transfer your emails, your YouTube videos, your social network posts, your business data that a lot of these companies house, they are the ones who have a powerful financial need to have enough capacity in place to handle all this traffic. So something like 99% of the traffic that's going across continents or to island nations goes across these subsea cables. You might think satellites are important. Satellites are important, but they're not nearly as important as these subsea cables when it comes to international communications and commerce.
Mm-hmm. Now, I was hoping you could also talk about the process of installing these cables. I was shocked to hear that in deeper parts of the ocean, as you mentioned, they're just kind of hanging out on the seafloor, just ready for anything to happen to them. But what does the process involve? Are we having like divers going down and with little trowels and digging them out and putting little sandcastles on top of them? What's the process for that?
No, actually, divers are occasionally involved, especially over at the shore ends of things, but mostly this is done by ships. So at the shore ends, the cables are buried fairly deeply. You don't notice them, but they go across beaches in some places. You can just walk right across one. You don't even know it in some parts of the world. So the way they're installed is there's going to be some nondescript building on the shore that'll have a bunch of network equipment in it and a whole lot of power supplied to it. And then the cable will go underground underneath a beach somewhere and then out, across the sea. So the first step that these companies have to figure out when they're building these cables is where to put them. So obviously the data demands, between one city and another is the first question. Then they have to pick a route that avoids, marine sanctuaries, places where there's lots of fishing or other activity, and geological problems like earthquakes, mudslides, and volcanoes, things like that, those sort of natural hazards. So it's difficult to plan the route. Once they plan the route, they put the end stations in, and then they get a very large ship that has huge tanks with the cables coiled inside, and they just drape it as they travel this route. They drape it very carefully. Now, one of the interesting things is toward the shore ends, in particular, of the cable route, they have a special plow that gets dragged behind the ship that actually buries the cable underneath the seafloor. So it's a pretty laborious process. A ship can carry several thousand miles of cable, but they still often have to make multiple trips out from the shore to where they're laying the cable. Obviously, that takes a long time, and sometimes they can't do it all just from one end to another. They'll have to lay one stretch and then another stretch. Sometimes they'll have to do it in backwards order, which means they have to laboriously re-spool all the cables so they can put the correct end down at the bottom. So it's a very complicated process.
Wow. Can you imagine getting through a process and then realizing, oh no, we put it the wrong way? That sounds mortifying. Now, something that, and by the way, folks, there is so much that Stephen has put together in that part about installing the cables that you have got to go read the piece to learn more about it, where they talk about flipping the spools and doing all this other stuff. So that is something to be saved for you to go check out. But another highlight that really stuck out to me, like any given time, there are about 10 of these cables that are just cut. Like, Tell us about cable cuts, how that happens, and what do they do about it? I mean, will the internet just suddenly go out everywhere if enough of these cable cuts happen? What do they do? Are there backups?
There are backups. So first of all, on the capacity on the cables themselves, they deliberately size the capacity larger than they need because they know that there are going to be outages somewhere at some point. So they actually plan very deliberately for outages. So yeah, every 2 or 3 days, another cable somewhere in the world gets cut. And you might ask, well, why? Why do they get cut? Mostly it's because of anchors of ships dragging across them or because of fishing equipment getting tangled up. And most of those problems happen closer toward the shore, which is good because it's easier to repair the cables that are closer to the shore. Across the bottom of the Pacific, the cables are very deep. They're not dragging fishing equipment across the bottom so much. So that's actually where fewer the cuts happen. It tends to be, in higher traffic areas. But yeah, they do happen. It's a problem. And there are lots of things that the companies do to protect against this situation. So as I said, the first one is they size the cable capacity higher so that if one cable from New York to London breaks, well, they have another cable from Boston to Ireland that has some extra capacity. So they turn that on for a while they get the original cable fixed. Another thing they do is they actually swap capacity. So say Meta might borrow a little capacity from Google cable. They might actually, swap ownership of a few fiber pairs from each other's cables so that if one company's cable goes down, they have more capacity elsewhere. But of course, then there are the repairs. So when a cable is cut, they know where it's cut. They can tell where it's cut. They send a ship out to actually splice in a new piece. So they reach down with a grappler, which is, centuries old technology. They grab the cable because they know pretty well where the cables are laid on the bottom of the ocean. They pick it up and they will graft on a new, new fiber optics onto one end, float that cable, pick up the other end, graft on fiber optics to the other end, and then attach that strand to both sides. So they can repair it. It's a routine part of the operation. You pay you pay a contractor to be on call with ships to repair the cables when needed.
Wow. Okay. Well, lastly, I want to ask you, you mentioned earlier, and I do think it's true. We are often kind of looking up and thinking about there's a lot more coverage, I think, and conversation about the satellites that are providing connectivity around the world. But what we know to be true, and especially after reading this, is that really it's the subsea cables that are providing most of what we have. So I'm kind of curious, based on the conversations that you've had, is there a slowing in the installation of new subsea cables as tech companies look to the skies? Or is this just such a great way of doing it that we will continue to see more undersea or subsea cables installed? And when it comes to that, is it a matter of somehow upgrading the cables that are already there? Or is it just we keep adding more cables?
So mostly we're adding more cables. So satellites are great, but I tend to think of satellites as chiefly useful for kind of retail connection, broadband to homes that are in rural areas, or, some military operation in some place. So those guys like Starlink or Hughes or Viasat satellites that are way up there. But that doesn't really provide anything like the amount of data capacity that the hyperscalers, the big tech companies need. So that's why there's actually a subsea cable building boom going on right now, kind of a surge. There are $10 billion being invested this year through 2025 in new subsea cables, because these guys, their data demands are going up at something like 50-60% per year. Huge growth. So yeah, they're building out new cables, and the satellites, there's just no way they can keep up. Now the satellites are getting more important. And I think, that's going to be a bigger part of our, internet interaction is going to be coming over satellites, especially if you're somewhere, away from the cell networks. But if you need, to send these cables send, the fastest one just went online 400 terabits per second. That's something like 400,000 times faster than fast gigabit broadband. So this is, these subsea cables provide vastly more capacity, and that's really essential to, the functioning of the global economy.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, Stephen Shankland, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day today to talk about this. Of course, everyone should head over to CNET to check out this piece. You can find the link in the show notes. But if folks want to follow you online and stay up to date with your work, where should they go to do so?
Sure. Well, I publish at cnet.com. You can find me on Twitter, now known as X, at St Shank, which has a link to all my other social profiles, since who knows what's going to happen with X/Twitter over the next year or 5. So that's the easiest way to follow me.
Awesome. Thanks so much. We appreciate it. And we'll look forward to having you back on again soon.
Great. Thank you.
One of the many imprints of this modern AI spectacle that we're, consumed by right now is a future that may be dotted with replica voices, right? Voices that sound like someone but aren't actually them. What happens when a computer or an algorithm, an AI, can actually imitate the voice of someone without their permission? Because you imagine, some people might give that permission, other people not so much, and it doesn't take much to do this, to use this technology. So it's creating some interesting problems along the way. Joining us to talk about this is Joseph Cox, who wrote about this in a few stories for Vice. Welcome back, Joseph.
Thank you for having me back.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to get you on, and you've upgraded your system. Your voice is crisper and clearer than it's ever been. So it's great to have you here.
Exactly.
Let's start with last week, because the stories that you wrote a couple of stories about this. It kind of began last week, or at least that's, when some of this news that we're talking about today started. And then we got some more news to follow up on for this week. So last week you wrote about 11 Labs. This is a company that's been working very hard on this replica voice technology, this AI system to replicate the voices. Anyone who's watching or listening to this show in podcast form will notice that the tease today was me ran through 11 Labs system. So you can use your own judgment as far as how good or how not so good it is. But anyways, so people are getting into trouble with this. Tell us a little bit about the company itself, the technology that the company has created, how much, and also I'm really curious about this, how much audio is really even needed to create a replica using their system.
Yeah, sure. So 11 Labs is one of these many, many companies in what I would call the audio generation space, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, right? And you have lots of these different companies basically all doing the same thing, right? Where you either record audio or you upload audio. I've tested several of them, and it can range anywhere from, 5 to 10 minutes of audio, up to 60 minutes of audio. Of course, the more audio you provide, presumably the better quality voice you're going to get. One I tried was I had to read, I think, a minimum of 50 lines that the site gave me, just a script that they've generated. And that was relatively quick, and it wasn't the best voice in the world, but I could have kept going as well. Where 11 Labs is a little bit different is that the barrier for entry is so low. They had this beta program a couple of weeks ago now, across a weekend, and you could basically just sign up and start generating voices. I can't remember if it was cheap or entirely free, but it was exceptionally easy to do this, and that's sort of the main thing they're offering. Whereas, and it's similar with visual deepfakes, where people are superimposing faces onto other people. That started as a very technical process where you had to use open source software and download it and run it yourself, blah, blah, blah. That's how audio started. And now companies like 11 Labs basically do all of that work for you. And that's where they sit in this industry at the moment.
And opens it up to really anyone that wants to use it, at least in its current beta form, which is democratizing. And, it kind of comes with the good and the bad, right? The good is everyone has access. Everyone should, someone shouldn't be just reduced or prevented from using a service, something like this that has the potential to have such a wide impact. But there is the other side that people end up using this for not so good reasons. 4chan members, as one example, apparently use the system to create unauthorized and in many ways abusive material. Talk a little bit about what they created, and it really didn't take them long. Of course, some people are just waiting for the opportunity to light the world on fire. But what did they create? And what is the response by the actual humans that were being replicated, if at all?
Yeah, so, I mean, as expected, 4chan took... it seems like it was 11 Labs, just because 4chan was also talking about 11 Labs while sharing these clips, so that's how we brought the link between the company and 4chan. But the clips themselves were a wide mix of a voice that sounded like Emma Watson reading Mein Kampf. There was some Joe Rogan stuff in there, some Ben Shapiro as well. I think there was a Rick and Morty one about domestic violence. So, the real spectrum of bad to horrific stuff, transphobic, homophobic, violent, whatever you want, it was being created and shared by these 4chan members. When it comes to the reaction of the people replicated, I haven't heard anything from particular celebrities, like Emma Watson or Joe Rogan or anyone like that. Yeah, but we're continuing to look at how this technology may be used to target, more ordinary people, because that is what is going to happen when the barrier of entry is so low. It's like, you could end up being a target of harassment or whoever. It doesn't necessarily have to be celebrities, so that's sort of what we're looking at next.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, this is just one angle, one aspect of how these services, can be applied, or how AI can be applied to creating something that didn't exist before. Audio and, voice being one example. There's music, there's art. And in all of these cases, we're kind of recognizing the impacts of these things. Deep fakes, what was it? Not very long ago, there were people that were putting, someone's face into like pornographic material and creating deep fake pornography. And of course, the person that's this, being placed into these situations did not give permission to do so. Now this is happening with our voice. Do companies like this? And actually, I should focus this on companies like 11 Labs, because that's what this whole story is about. Do they have, is there any way that they can control those kinds of things? I guess in the realm of like pornographic material, AI systems can recognize at this point if something has a high likelihood of being pornographic. But what about, unauthorized voices? Like that seems like a lot harder to crack down on.
Yeah, so I don't know if 11 Labs has put this measure in, but I did try another audio generation company where they had a sort of interesting mechanism where after you've read your script or uploaded your audio or whatever, it came up with a message where you had to say, "Hi, yes, I am Joseph Cox. I authorize this company to produce a replica of my voice." So the person whose voice you're generating has to have said that. Now, obviously, if you're recording your own voice, that's not an issue because you just say it. Not everybody's going to have a recording of Emma Watson lying around saying exactly those words, right? So there are some sort of technical mechanisms in place. Obviously, I'm sure you could trick it or work around it somehow, but there's something there. And then 11 Labs, when this misuse was being identified, they came out and they sort of more asked Twitter, like, hey, what should we do? Do you think maybe we should ask for a full identification check? Maybe we could do payment authorization. So, you can only generate a voice if you've signed up with a credit card, something like that. I imagine that would be quite effective at stopping a lot of the trolls. One service I tried, I had to pay, or rather I had to subscribe to a $30 a month subscription model. And, maybe not all the trolls are going to want to spend $30 on whatever they're doing. Some will, but like not all of them. So there are measures in place. And then you bring up, whether artificial intelligence could detect certain imagery. Yes, absolutely. For audio, I guess so, but then you're going to almost get into the question of, well, is this audio being generated for acting? Which, of course, we'll get into a story that we'll speak to in a minute. And the use case can, of course, bring in irony, satire, acting. It just sounds like it could get very complicated very quickly,
Yeah, no question. There are no easy solutions for these things. And it feels like we're right in the middle of this AI explosion. So these things undoubtedly, it's going to take time to figure these things out and get it to a point to where everybody feels respected and you can trust these systems to do good. But I guess the reality is there's probably no such thing as totally and completely free and clear of people, using these things for harm. But you mentioned it this week. You wrote about how many voice actors are actually being asked to allow or sign away, I guess, their rights to their voices for these AI systems. What the actor, because you and your team spoke to a number of actors about, for this story. What did they say about how these deals are structured? Like, what are they asking for?
It varies, but generally the response I got was that, first of all, the sort of clauses in contracts which bring up synthetic voices or that sort of thing, they don't usually say artificial intelligence. They say likeness, synthetic, replication, that sort of thing. So they're getting more and more prevalent. And, one advocacy organization said they're very prevalent at this point. The general feedback I got from the actors was that, well, they don't want to have to do this. They want to have the option to be like, well, no, I'll just come in and do my job as a voice actor. I would like to be able to do that work without also signing away my rights to you so that you can then go generate something with artificial intelligence. And, there are lots of different reasons why a voice actor wouldn't want that. But one that really stood out to me was that if you're a voice actor, you're in a booth, you're doing your session, maybe a line comes up in the script that you don't like, you don't agree with, and you're not comfortable performing it. You can very easily, well, hopefully very easily, depending on the power dynamic, you can say, I don't want to read that line. And ordinarily that would be the end of it, because you are not going to provide consent. You're not going to read out the line and give them the audio. Of course, if the producer, the director, whoever now has the rights to your voice to go make an AI version, well, you don't need to read the line. They'll just go make it if you're not agreeable to this. So that idea of consent, that really, really jumped out to me when I was speaking to these voice actors.
Yeah, no kidding. An actor saying, that is just something that I'm not willing to say, that I would never say. And then with these rights signed away, it happens anyways. Now, sure, it wasn't them saying it, but that's kind of that misses the point when it's your voice and, everything is open to interpretation. I think those subtleties get lost when you're talking about millions of people hearing that particular voice saying that particular thing. I could get into a lot of problem. Did you and your team speak with any artists or actors who are offering voices who actually welcome this technology? Because, on one hand, I totally understand where they're coming from. On the other hand, I'm like, yeah, but there's also the potential of opportunity there. Like, I, as a voice actor, can only do so much. If I can lend my voice to a project without doing it myself, that might be time I don't have, but money I can make on another project.Ere there any that said, hey, this is actually pretty cool?
Yeah, so I reached out to 11 Labs to ask them, look, have you spoken to any voice actors and that sort of thing? Have you consulted with any? And they sent me a quote from a voice actor called Lance Blair. I then reached out to Lance Blair myself, obviously, to verify what they said and chatted to them independently. But he shared the concerns of his colleagues across the industry, but he also saw the benefit in this technology, that he could maybe be able to use it to supplement his income or use it in different ways and that sort of thing. So look, there are people who could use it. I would say that he worked, at least judging by his portfolio, more on the conference narration sort of side, whereas most of the voice actors I spoke to are in video games like Apex Legends or Halo Infinite, that sort of thing. So the industry is very, very broad, right? And it has lots of different actors and servicing lots of different industries. And with that being said, one of the advocacy organizations I spoke to said that this AI could really knock out more the blue collar voice actor worker who may be working a 9-to-5 job in some other industry and is then trying to record stuff at night, in the evening, or maybe the early morning to try to get a break into this career. That's just not going to happen if AI can easily pick up the work for people. And then just lastly, I would just say that when 11 Labs, when I went to them and asked for a statement, they said that, well, for voice actors, they're no longer limited by the time they can spend in the booth. They can go out and, well, they can send their voice out and people can replicate it and they can make money that way. I did show that to one voice actor and they were like, the issue is not that we don't have time to go in the booth. We want to go in the booth as much as possible. It's kind of a fundamental misunderstanding of how these voice actors actually want to work. They want more work. They don't want to give it away to the AI.
Yeah. Not 100% of their time is occupied to where they couldn't, make time to go into the booth. That's obviously their preference. So this is really interesting to see how this works out. I have to wrap the interview, but another thing that comes to mind is like, signing over your rights and then say that actor or actress passes away. How do those rights extend into beyond them being alive? I'm sure that would be hammered out in the details and in the contract, but you could really see where suddenly, their voice is locked away and used in the future like it has been in the past. So anyways, very interesting stuff. Joseph Cox, really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. Joseph, of course, writes for Vice, vice.com. If people want to follow you online, do you point them to Twitter, Mastodon? Where are you hanging out these days?
My Twitter is Joseph F. Cox, and my Mastodon, which I set up yesterday or started using yesterday, is just Joseph Cox. So you can be one of my 32 followers if you really want. But yeah,
there you go. Get in early.
Yes.
Get in early. You could say you were there at the beginning. Thank you, Joseph. We'll talk to you soon. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay, I have to admit, a little chilling to hear these AI voice replicas. And frankly, as the year has gone on, they've only gotten better.
Yeah, it's really getting to kind of like a fever pitch at this point. And still, we're only like a year in. It really blows me away.
I can't imagine what it's going to be like 2 years from now.
Yeah.
I don't know if you folks remember Reddit, but it is the service that is still there. But one of the big things that happened this year was the ending of the Apollo app on iOS and the Reddit blackout and the Reddit API change. I mean, Reddit had a
huge
big
in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It felt like the biggest thing that was going on for sure. So give a listen to Christian Selig talking about Apollo and everything else. Many of you probably know that Reddit is going through a bit of a
kerfuffle.
A kerfuffle?
Yeah.
I was going to say war at the moment. It's at the very least a kerfuffle.
Yeah, sure.
And
I just like calling things kerfuffles.
That's a really nice
don't
word,
mind me.
right?
Yeah.
So while we ponder whether it's a kerfuffle or a war or something in between, joining us is someone who I think can provide some more insider understanding of this because whether he chose to or not, he's ended up kind of at the forefront of what's going on at Reddit. It is the developer of Apollo, the Reddit client on iOS, Christian Selig. Welcome to the show, Christian.
Thanks so much for having me, you two. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Great to get to talk to you about this. As a person who has used Apollo for some time, has talked about it on my shows, seeing the tweet fly by where you mentioned that there were going to be some changes taking place, some unfortunate changes. That was definitely a pretty shocking moment, a pretty sad moment. And I'm glad to get to talk to you about this as we inch ever closer to the day where things change. But before we get into that, I always like to start out by making sure that we are all on the same page. So I was hoping that you could tell our listeners what an API is. We need to get this vocabulary in place, and then how your app Apollo interacts with Reddit's API specifically.
Yeah. So if it helps, I think for like the first few years of being a programmer, the concept, like the word API, I still had no idea what it meant, but it's actually, it's incredibly simple. And I think that's why it is a little confusing because it's deceptively simple. It's just a way of talking to something, basically. So it's how you interact with something. So Reddit has an API that allows developers to talk to Reddit as a service and say, hey, could you upvote this comment for me? Or could you reply to this comment for me? Or could you give me the post in this subreddit? Or could you give me the comments for this specific post? And each of those is just an API request. So couldn't be simpler. Like Apple has APIs all over their operating system for doing certain things. Like if you were an app and you wanted to work with the Siri API, so Siri would be able to accept commands to your app through voice. Like it's just how you interact with something. And Reddit's historically, throughout its entire life of almost 15 years has had an API that lets developers communicate with Reddit and get data back and ask it to do things. So at a very high level, it's incredibly simple. You're just talking with Reddit, and hopefully Reddit responds with helpful information.
Got it. Yeah, that's a great way to understand it, and I do. You really nailed it in terms of it being a lot simpler than what you expect. And so whenever you hear it, you're like, "Is that all? Are you?" Yeah, but that was a great way to put it. So that API, the Reddit API, is at the center of this Reddit controversy. Tell us about the upcoming change and how that's impacted your ability to continue offering Apollo, the very popular client on iOS.
Yeah. So, like I said, historically, Reddit's had that API and it's been free. So every time you requested information, you would basically hand Reddit a little token saying like, "Hey, I'm Apollo. I'm the one asking for this. Like, this information would be handy to have." And Reddit would provide it to developers. And there was kind of like a mutual understanding. Well, first off, like for a long time, Reddit didn't have any official app. So if you wanted to browse Reddit on mobile, it was through these third-party applications. But even once Reddit released it, there was still this kind of understanding. Their CEO even said at the time, like, we want Redditors, people who use Reddit, to be able to browse Reddit through how they prefer. And if there's a different experience that maybe suits them better, we like giving people the option to browse Reddit in that way. Because say you go to Reddit and you download the official app and it just doesn't click for whatever reason, it's kind of better for everyone if rather than just ditching the service altogether, maybe there's a different way to browse Reddit that might strike a chord with you. And even beyond that, there's like less preferential reasons that it's nice to have. Like Reddit is staffed by an absolutely massive team of like unpaid volunteer moderators who moderate the communities and make sure that like spam is kept out, people are respectful, etc. And a lot of them prefer to do such a thing in third-party apps because the moderator tools are just a little bit more fleshed out, or they just find them faster or easier to use, or there's features that might not be available in the first-party app. And you also have like accessible users, someone who might be blind or low vision, who maybe the first-party app isn't very well labeled in terms of like screen reader support, so they'll prefer a third-party app. So there's a whole host of reasons why third-party apps have been like a huge part of Reddit's culture. And what's changing quite rapidly is that they're moving to a paid API, which is like, to be 100% clear, totally fair. Like it's one of those things where Reddit came to developers and said like, look, like we like working with you and we don't want to kill you, but like this, giving all of this information away for free isn't something we see as like tenable long-term. And like every developer I talked to was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like I think it's benefited both parties historically, but if that's something that you think you would like money for, like that's totally reasonable. We were, if anything, excited about it because like there's been historically been some specific functions on Reddit that weren't exposed through the API. So being like, oh, we might be able to enter in a partnership with them in a little bit more of a formal capacity and maybe get access to more of those APIs. It was an exciting opportunity to maybe like formalize our relationship with Reddit a little better. But it's one of those things, like I said before, it's kind of the detail, the devil's in the details, where the price they ultimately landed on and the 30 days they gave from when the pricing was announced to when developers would start incurring potentially massive charges was only 30 days. So you kind of have these two really tricky aspects hitting you both at once as a developer, where the API has been available for 15 years. And then you have 30 days to completely revamp your app. Otherwise you'll face like incredibly, like to the tune of millions of dollars in charges. So it just became very tricky for developers like myself, for Apollo, to figure out like how to survive that. And spoiler alert, you kind of can't.
Yeah, I almost imagine it leading up to this point, there was a sort of a pedestal upon which was a red phone, and Apollo could always pick up the phone and talk to Reddit and get in touch with Reddit and get the data that it needed and then hang up. And then you would go about your way. Then suddenly they're saying, we're going to replace that red phone with a pay phone, which we haven't had for years. And now you're suddenly having to stick quarters into it in order to call up Reddit and get that data that you're trying to get. And there was a part of you that was excited because those quarters you were putting in meant that it would change from just like a standard pay phone to also having a computer terminal in front of it where you could get more information than you ever could before, interact in all of these different ways. But instead, it sounds like they're asking you to put gold bricks into it instead of just quarters, where you would hope that it could just be the quarters to help it.
I appreciate how close you stuck to that analogy.
Thank you.
Anyways.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the only thing I'd build on that analogy would be that like, there was kind of a sign out front of the phone booth that said, "Hey, we're going to be doing this. It's not going to be free anymore, but we just want you to know that it's our interest isn't to like kill you, or we want this to be like a price that's based in reality and fair and equitable."
Mm-hmm.
And then you see in a gold bar, and you're kind of like, I don't see how that is a cost representative,
Right?
Like thing based in reality. And then they're also like, you have 30 days to start giving us gold bars. And so it's like all those things kind of come together to be like, if you weren't trying to kill third party apps, like how else did you think this would go? I guess would almost be my question. Like it might just be they're quite removed. Like Reddit's like they're worth billions of dollars. And it's kind of like, I don't know if they thought that's something that everybody has access to in terms of like millions of dollars, but I'm just building Apollo in my apartment and I certainly don't have that kind of money. So yeah, it became pretty untenable.
I think that's what's so surprising about how this is all played out. Because like you said earlier, and I agree, like Reddit is a company. It's here to make money. It's its own service. It can make the choices that it wants. Yet it really seemed to set the stage early on that it was going to do something to allow third party developers like yourself to continue. It kind of put this cloud of hope in front of this thing and said, "Hey, don't worry about it. We're going to come up with something that's going to allow this to continue because it's really important to us." And yet out the other side of their mouth, like when it actually comes out, like it really does seem like two opposite realities. Like, have you heard, or are you willing to address whether you've heard or not, anything from Reddit in kind of talking about that kind of not bait and switch, but that about face between those two realities?
No, not really. I wish I could say I had an explanation, but like I've asked them like kind of how they came upon these figures, because they said like these figures seem reasonable to them. And I was kind of saying, like in one of my posts, I kind of broke down that they've historically posted like years ago, I think it was either 2019 or 2021. I'd have to look it up, but it was like, here's how much money we've made per quarter. It was like $100 million in their best quarter, and they have X many millions of monthly active users. So it was like 430 million. So you can do some very easy math there to say like, okay, so this is your average revenue per month per user. So if you have like 430 million users and you have $500 million in revenue, that's, napkin math. That's about $1 a year per user. And it works out to be about like 12 cents a month. So when you're saying like, we're making 12 cents a month per user, but we think it's reasonable to charge you anywhere from like $1.50 to like $10 a user, depending on how much they use the app. That's like, you're looking at a multiple of like anywhere from 10 times to almost 100 times what they're earning per user. Like it's just kind of like, they weren't ever able to answer how that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure it can.
Yeah, it kind of doesn't, right?
Yeah, it just doesn't.
Yeah. I think that was almost why they couldn't explain it. And even beyond like the financials of revenue, I think Reddit's in a very unique position versus a lot of even other social media sites where you have like the Twitters and Facebooks of the world, where their moderators for the content they have are paid employees. Like I think Facebook they have like something like a $200 million contract for 2 years with a company to do their moderation, where Reddit is like completely, it's unpaid volunteer moderators doing this just because they enjoy the communities. And I think it's very easy to say like Reddit has bills to pay and engineers to pay, and they have to keep the lights on like 100% absolutely. But it's also like, I think it's important to remember how much free labor they have that benefits the website, and not doing them a disservice by cutting off tools that they use to do their job. And just even the community at large, like Reddit doesn't sell any hardware or software themselves. Like their value is intrinsically in the community and the content they create. So I think balancing this act of being like, are we respecting our community and moderators through our actions is really integral, like fundamentally to the financials of the company as well. And it's one of those things that it kind of feels like they're losing sight of, even though historically they've been quite good at balancing that.
Now, we don't have too much time, but I've still got a lot of questions. I do really want to ask you this, and you touched on it a little bit. I know you've probably gotten this question a lot. In fact, I've seen people ask you this question before. You published a post in which you announced you'd be shutting down Apollo just right before Reddit's new API policy goes into effect. And the question is, what made you choose to shut down the app, or what is going to make you choose to shut down the app instead of, say, raising the price for the Apollo subscription, or asking folks to, throw money into a tip jar for, to sort of get you over the hump? What's the choice to kind of shut down instead of go forth? And I want to preface this, or I guess postface this, by saying that the answers that I've seen you give really have made a lot of sense. And so I just want you to be able to communicate that to our listeners.
Yeah, honestly, there's so many reasons. And I think, I guess in the interest of time, I'll just say three. So the first one is, it doesn't seem to me like at this point, through the actions Reddit have taken, have indicated that they want third-party apps around in any capacity anymore. So it would be one of those things where, like, if you're going into work every day knowing your boss kind of hates you and is trying to figure out a way to get rid of you, it's not an environment that is super productive to work in, I would say. And I think, like, Reddit's actions, even through how they've kind of indirectly tried to kill third-party apps, but even beyond that, like, there's been weird allegations where they said I've, like, tried to blackmail them and stuff, which thankfully I recorded the call and showed that wasn't the case at all. So there's, like, kind of just this bad blood aspect where they really seem to hate third-party apps for some reason. And then, I guess that would be reason one. Reason two would be even just like, okay, just charge everyone $5 a month if they want to stay around. Like, the economics of that are really tricky because the way Reddit chose to do this is based on a per API call basis, which isn't inherently weird or anything, but at the price they chose, it changes the calculus a little. So, like, unsurprisingly, like, a free user typically uses less API calls than a paid user, so they cost less. The average subscription user in Apollo currently uses about a little less than 500 requests per day on average. So when you do the math, that works out to about, over the course of a month, it would cost about $3.60 or 70 cents to keep them around. So if I charge them $5, after Apple takes their cut, you're looking at like $3.50 left to the developer. So I'm at like 10, 20 cents in the red on your average user. So then it's like, okay, so maybe you charge a little bit more, but then it's like, I also have a subset of users, like 5%, which is like tens of thousands of users who use between like 1 and 2,000 requests a day. So you're looking at that point, like between like $7.50 in fees and $15 in fees. And it just gets so exponentially expensive almost that it becomes almost, you've got to like choose like a phone plan where you try to estimate how much usage you're using. And then you have to turn off their service after a while. So it becomes very untenable even from a financial aspect. And then even if the price was cheaper, the third reason would be that I already have like around like 50,000 yearly subscribers who paid, like, say, Micah, you could have paid like 3 months ago, so you would still have like 9 months of your 12 months of service left. And I already collected your payment based on the operating costs I had at the time. So like design fees, server fees. I have a part-time server engineer, and about the $1 a month I charged you was able to cover that. Now Reddit's coming in and saying, like, starting July 1st, you're going to start incurring charges where each of those users at absolute minimum, but more on average $3.50 will cost about $1. So you have 50,000 users who have already paid, and I can't monetize through no fault of their own, to be clear, that are going to start incurring between $1 and say $3 each. So I'm looking at a bill of like $50,000 to $150,000 a month, that'll start incurring July 1st. That I can't make any further money off of them. That'll just be like potentially hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of dollars I'll have to pay over the course of the year until their subscription expires. So like the calculus there is, it's just cheaper to work with Apple to refund all those subscriptions and close up shop than to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to Reddit. So there's like so many aspects where just the way they went about this kill the third-party apps in so many ways. And yeah, I wish there was a way I could figure it out. But I talked with a lot of smart people. I was at Dub last week, and just no matter who I talked to and how I tried to ring it out, it was just wasn't making any sense. There was always like a hiccup. And I tried to talk to Reddit and say, like, could you give us more time to make this change? And there was just radio silence on there, and they haven't answered my emails in a while. So
yeah, and that's one thing that I think is well worth pointing out is the fact that it's not as if you got this news and then you just said, well, this isn't going to work and we're done with it.
No.
You and other third-party developers have communicated with Reddit, have tried to reach some sort of agreement where instead of gold bars, it's silver bars or something, going back to the original metaphor. But I want to ask you one last question. I wish we could have you stick around for a lot longer, but I'm curious, do you think there's any chance that these ongoing blackouts, because there are some subreddits who've announced that they're going to continue things past this point, the outcry and even the press attention that you and others are getting, do you think that any of that could result in a change on Reddit's end, or are you pretty much certain, or not Reddit's end, but Apollo's end, or are you pretty much certain that come June 30th, I believe, you are going to sort of flip that big switch?
I would say I really hope it'll have an effect because, like I said, the changes that they would have to do to show the community that they are listening are so minor. It would just be a matter of like, even if you just kept the same price, just saying like, I will give you 90 days to try to come up with some gold bars and completely revamp your app, and ideally saying like, look, we apologize for how we handled this. And we treated developers with a lot of honestly disrespect. And we're kind of going back to the drawing board and we want to talk with them and figure out how we can make this right going forward. And yeah, I think those steps are so minor and so easy to do that I would hope that they would respect the community enough to just do those minor things. But it's really anyone's guess at this point. I have no clue.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking some time today to talk to us. Christian Selig, if folks want to follow you online and see perhaps what's next, where should they go to do that?
I am on Twitter and Mastodon as at Christian Selig.
All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
The pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much for having me.
Before we dig into this most recent Senate hearing, I think it'd be a good idea to kind of rewind and talk about what happened that led up to this and talk about why the Senate is talking to the CFO and president of Live Nation, if you could do that for us.
Yeah, so I think to zoom out, it's sort of the same issue of if you're a music fan or a sports fan, we've all had this happen to us where you want to buy tickets for something and you're like there the moment they go on sale, they're $50 tickets, suddenly they're all sold out, and then a minute later they're reselling for like $200. So then as the consumer, you're like, well, do I pay 4 times the price or do I just not go to this thing I want to go to? And so this is an existing problem. And then it sort of came to a crescendo in November when the Taylor Swift Eras Tour went on pre-sale, and it was just such a disaster. And people that had like verified fan, which is like a Ticketmaster program, like they had verified fan pre-access and weren't able to get in. There was an unprecedented amount of activity on the website, and Ticketmaster just wasn't prepared to handle it. And they ended up canceling ticket sales. Some fans were in virtual queues for hours at a time. And it was just a huge mess. And I think in part because of the popularity of Taylor Swift and the popularity of this tour, it really brought into the forefront the issues of like, we all have so many problems on Ticketmaster, and that's just kind of our only option in the ecosystem, it can feel like.
Absolutely. And one of the things that stuck out to me was I knew about the Ticketmaster thing, but you also talked about an issue that different folks had with the Bad Bunny concert. So even after the Taylor Swift debacle, there was more that happened. And I'm curious, was it a situation where it's the straw that broke the camel's back, or was it a situation that because of Taylor Swift's popularity, is that why you think this got as much attention as it did? Did it just take an artist this big to do so? Or was it kind of like, look, this is the final straw. We continue to see this. And whether you're a small artist or a large artist, this is an issue.
Yeah, well, I really love this quote from Lena Khan, who's the current FTC chair, where she said that the Taylor Swift pre-sale ticketing debacle turned more people into anti-monopolists than anything she could have ever done, which I just love it. But yeah, I mean, the Bad Bunny concert is just another example of how when companies like Ticketmaster fail, it affects people. Like what happened in that situation was Bad Bunny was playing 2 sold out arena shows in Mexico City, and there were thousands of people who they bought tickets on Ticketmaster. Like this wasn't like a resale thing. Like these were Ticketmaster sold tickets, and then they couldn't get in because Ticketmaster sold more than the capacity of the venue. And it's just things like that where like it's frustrating for consumers because they spent so much money on these tickets that they got on Ticketmaster and they still can't get into the show because of problems with the company.
Yikes. Now, moving on to the hearing that took place to kind of investigate what was going on, talking to the CFO and president of Live Nation, I noticed not only in your piece, but all over social media, there were Taylor Swift references aplenty. And it was interesting seeing the initial reaction to those references where people seemed to be kind of annoyed by it, seemed to be bothered that maybe the senators or, the folks talking to CFO were not taking it seriously. But I am curious, from your own perspective and looking at this and looking at the reaction and kind of trying to piece through things, you think there's a strategy at work here? Is this, memeable behavior for the sake of getting it in front of more people's eyes? It's kind of going back to what, Lena Khan said, where this situation here resulted in generations that may not pay attention to this suddenly paying attention to it. Or was it just the fact that senators are trying to be, stars in their own right and make jokes for the sake of making jokes?
I feel like they're probably just trying to have fun, but there could be an agenda behind it of like when Senator Blumenthal says that Ticketmaster needs to look in the mirror and says, "It's me, I'm the problem, it's me." Like I laughed. Like it's just kind of, you don't expect those kinds of jokes to happen at a Senate hearing. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I mean, this has really become a mainstream issue. Like there are diehard Swifties that are watching this hearing, and these aren't people that are typically like, yeah, let me tune in to senate.gov / whatever. Right. Yeah, I mean, it does probably draw more attention to the issue, but I also think this is already like a bit more of a popular potential monopoly case than like Meta buying another VR company. Like it's right. Taylor Swift.
Yeah. Now, I was kind of taken aback. There was a shocking number in your article, 80%. That number, according to the Department of Justice, it relates to Ticketmaster and Live Nation merging, in which they control that new company. The Department of Justice said, hey, this will mean that Ticketmaster and Live Nation will control 80% of the market. And so it made me kind of wonder about that initial merger. Was their concern about the fact that the company would own 80% of the market by their estimation, and anything, put in place to sort of quell that concern, since obviously the merger did go through?
Yeah, well, the reason why the merger went through was because they enforced a consent decree, which basically is a ruling that it would be a violation for Live Nation to like go to a venue or an artist or like whoever is involved in a situation and be like, hey, like if you don't use Ticketmaster for your sales, then we're not going to let you use our promoters or our venue, which like it is really complicated because in these situations, like Ticketmaster might be selling the tickets, but Live Nation operates venues. They like exist in basically every aspect of promoting a show. So the DOJ basically wanted to make sure that Ticketmaster and Live Nation couldn't pressure other entities and to make sure that they're using the services that they want them to use. And that 80% number was from when the DOJ was like looking into this, like, is this a monopoly? Should we block this merger, back in like 2010? Mm-hmm. And at the hearing this week, the CFO of Ticketmaster was like, well, actually, or of Live Nation, but he was like, well, actually, it's more like 50 or 60% of the market share now, because there's all these resale outlets like Vivid Seats, SeatGeek, etc. But that's still a big amount. I think there's like specific thresholds for what is a monopoly, but that's a lot.
Yeah. That 80% really does stick out. Now, yes, this consent decree was the thing that was put in place, and it was modified in 2019, according to your piece, because there was sort of, I guess we'll call it concern. It was technically more than just concern, but not a whole lot seemed to come of it. So a concern that Ticketmaster / Live Nation had violated the consent decree. So they went ahead and modified it in 2019. What changes were put in place to try and make a difference in how Ticketmaster, Live Nation were handling things?
The Justice Department modified the decree because it found that Live Nation had violated it and was using like Ticketmaster and vice versa as leverage to try to get other promoters to do more favorable deals with them. And Live Nation denied this, but who knows? As a result, it made the decree extend another 5 years, and they revised it just to be more clear about what Live Nation can and can't do. So they're still under that decree for a few more years at this point.
Interesting. Yeah. So quite literally, the thing that the decree was meant to prevent was what Live Nation was then accused of doing. And so the Department of Justice said, well, we're going to make it so that it's a little bit more clear, so you don't have these gray areas. And also, we're going to make you hold to it longer, which is fascinating. Now, all of this, of course, is about investigating what happened and, in theory, making changes that would have an impact on the way that this is all working, or I should say not working. Has anyone come up with any ideas to actually solve the problem? And if so, what are the proposed solutions to this issue? Or is this more about punishing the company and then letting the company figure out how they're going to solve it?
I think it's still up in the air at this point. At the hearing, there were some potential solutions thrown out. One of them is waiting and see what comes of the ongoing Department of Justice investigation into Live Nation. And if that investigation finds that Live Nation is acting as a monopoly, then the senators on the panel said that breaking up Live Nation could be on the table. Some other proposals were they talked about the Bots Act, which was passed in 2016 and basically gives the FTC license to crack down on ticket resale firms that use bots, buy all the Taylor Swift tickets, then mark them up for like 4 times the price. And that act has only been enforced one time in 2021 when there were 3 firms that were fined a total of $31 million, I believe. And so some of the senators were saying like, well, the FTC needs to enforce that more. And then another proposal was, what if reselling tickets just isn't legal? And what if like you can't transfer a ticket? But I don't really think people were enthusiastic about that, because then like what happens if I buy a ticket for me and my friend for a concert and my friend like can't go anymore? Like,
right.
It's just like not really a solution.
And it also opens up Live Nation / Ticketmaster to make a bunch of money on ticket insurance. You know what I mean? And then you pay that $15 so you can get your money back because you get sick and can't go, instead of being able to sell it to your friend. Yeah, this is, I mean, in this one very specific way, I do have some, feels and understanding for this company, because this is a hard problem to solve. And I think that that's why it has taken, in part taken such a long time to do it. I think that it is perhaps a good idea for there to be some pushback so that the company sort of prioritizes this. But I think it'll be fascinating to continue to see and continue to watch to see how these companies are going to try to fix the problem. But in the meantime, I'm curious, Amanda, do you foresee, if you can look in your crystal ball, artists sort of making their own version of Ticketmaster? Because I know there were early calls for that and folks saying, hey, if anyone can do it, it's Taylor Swift.
I don't know if Taylor Swift necessarily wants to do that. Mm-hmm. I could call her up right now. No, I can't. But I don't know. I think that it's hard to start a company, even if you're a celebrity. There's just a lot that goes into making a platform that has these kinds of like tech innovation that can stop the bots, which it's like if Ticketmaster can't adequately stop bots, and they've been doing this for how long, then like if Taylor Swift creates a platform tomorrow, does she have the resources to invest in people to make the kind of technology that Ticketmaster hasn't successfully implemented? Which I don't know. I mean, like, never underestimate Swifties. Like, they can do anything, but I'm afraid of them. They are a formidable force on the internet.
Indeed. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out to talk to us today. If folks want to follow you online and make sure they're staying up to date with your work, where should they go to do so?
I am unfortunately still very on Twitter. I cannot break the habit. So my Twitter is at @asilbrights, ASILB Rights. And you can find my writing on TechCrunch. And I have a podcast, Wow If True, about internet culture. And I think it's good. So you should listen to it.
Absolutely. I didn't realize that you did. And I will be downloading or subscribing to that right after the show. So that's exciting. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I was hoping that you could start by telling us just a bit about the Surgeon General's advisory on social media and youth mental health. There might have been some folks who didn't hear that this came out, but yes, the Surgeon General has all sorts of information, and this latest advisory covers mental health and kids.
Exactly. So it came out this week. It's about 25 pages long. There's a short version, which I appreciate because it sort of acknowledges we all have attention span issues, which is circular. And it's interesting because it's a warning that also includes a whole bunch of hedging saying we don't know that much. It's like we don't know if this is mostly bad or good for kids. And the takeaway is we don't know enough to feel safe letting children just have unfettered access to social media. It's a call for parents to do more. Weirdly, it's a call for kids to stop bullying, like that's ever stopped a kid from doing anything. And it's also a call on the companies to do a lot more about their settings and research into their products.
Yeah, I imagine if I tell this, I go to school as, a middle schooler, and I say, the Surgeon General said you have to stop bullying me. That's just going to get me bullied more. But along with this came the opportunity to talk about a guide that you have written that sort of covers some recommendations on what a parent or guardian might want to do when it comes to their kid. Because as you point out, the Surgeon General's advisory in terms of the recommendations is a little vague, and it's more about kind of the generally, it's not even generally recognized as safe as we have with the FDA. It's like generally recognized as shruggy emoji because we just don't know the impact yet. So luckily, you've got some more concrete information, and that is why I'm glad that we can talk about this today. Let's start with age. The advisory does focus on kids and teens, and this is where I ask, while knowing in my brain the answer, are there kids who have access to social media? And at what age should we expect kids to be exposed to social media? And according to the research that you did, at what age should a kid be given their first phone?
So, I mean, the first thing to understand is kids are going to have access to social media. You could hide every phone in your house and oh God, I sound like every old panic. They're going to be exposed to it at school. So 95% of teens, so 13 to 17-year-olds, are on social media in some way or have access to it. And 40% of kids 8 to 12 have some access to social media. And now something to keep in mind here is that in a lot of these studies, YouTube is considered social media. And kids love their YouTube. So it might sound a lot scarier than it really is. It's not like they're out here with Finstas and, whatever the kids are doing on TikToks. So yeah, they're on social media. My kids know what TikTok is. They're definitely younger because we will sit there and we will look up a specific animal together and we'll laugh. And so there's all kinds of different levels of exposure they're getting. So when it comes to the big question of when do you let them have a phone, which is going to be their portal into real social media without you being able to watch everything they do, you read this report, you're going to think, well, I never want them to have a phone. I never want them to have social media. And that's completely unrealistic. And so what we've kind of talked to experts about is this sweet spot around 14, sometime in middle school, when they're having a bit more independence. You might also want to use those tracking features to see where they are in a safety way, not a creepy parent way. So I think that's when you first start to give them their own devices. It could even be a wearable, but a lot of times it is a smartphone.
Yeah. And there was something that stuck out to me in your guide. You point out that there are many apps and services that kids aren't legally supposed to use. And, you and I have probably in tech coverage that we've done learned about this, but it stuck out to me because I thought about the parents that I know who may not be aware of that. So could you talk a little bit about how there are some online services that kids aren't supposed to be on based on what the law is?
The general rule is apps designed for adults, that's 13 and up in the United States. In Europe, I believe it's 16 and up. Maybe we should take some cues from them. But yes, if you're under 13, you should not be able to have an account on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok. It is against the rules. And the funny thing is nobody's actually paying attention to those rules. I recently wrote about how Uber is starting to allow teens to ride in cars. And I talked to a bunch of teens who are like, we weren't supposed to be in Ubers. Just nobody pays attention to these rules. But yeah, you should be 13 or older before you sign up for anything.
And then I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the ways that parents can limit, track, and monitor their kids' technology use, but then also discuss the pitfalls that you kind of hinted at earlier that can come with that limiting, tracking, and monitoring. There are services out there that allow parents to do so on Android and on iOS and in other ways. Tell us about a little bit about what's available, because we want folks to go check out your guide, obviously, to learn more about this. And then what's the risk there in doing so?
So there's two things. One, when you first give them the phone, I highly recommend doing it just a little bit younger and turning on all the settings. It's going to be a billion times harder to take away access to something later than it is just to start out with nothing. Like, here's your phone. It has a calculator app. Let's go from there. So that's kind of the first step. And then the other thing is your kids they're smarter than you. I'm sorry, but they are. They're going to figure out a way around everything, or they're just going to go to their friend's house and figure out a way around it there. So you want to have some control. You want to have rules with them. And then you also have to understand that at the end of the day, they're still going to access weird things on the internet. And so the most important thing that parents can actually do is have conversations with their kids, like actual hard conversations about bullying, about, grooming, predators on the internet, pornography. And one of my favorite experts I talked to, her name is Catherine. She says, when you get them earlier, they're just more likely to listen to you. Like before the teen years, when they're like, Mom, I don't want to talk about sex. Like you get them young and they're like, oh, this is fascinating. Tell me all about it. And it's just a small window of first phone, still likes you. And that's really your sweet spot.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. And then you talk about how, or perhaps it was one of the folks that you spoke to, but it stuck out to me because I know a lot of parents, again, who are using these tracking means for their children, but there was sort of a tip on how to do it so that it is not the creepy parent way, like you talked earlier, but in the safety way. What advice can you give about that? How do you approach that with a child where they don't necessarily feel like they're having to, I don't know, strap their phone to their cat and run away?
Wait, is that a good workaround? I should write about that.
Please don't write that down. No one out there listening. I don't know.
Don't tell the kids.
Yeah.
So, it's really important to teach kids consent, and it's a two-way street, right? So we also want to get their consent before we do something like tracking them. And the most important thing, no matter what level of controls you have on them, they need to know about them. There are some outliers. If you have a kid who's already struggled with addiction issues or has some serious issues, and this is recommended by a professional, that's between you guys, let professionals help you make these decisions. But for regular kids, you do not want to be tracking them in any way they don't know about. And what's also interesting is kids these days are just really used to being tracked by their parents. I was like a teen raver, and I would just spend the night at a friend's house, and it never occurred to me that my parents would catch me. But kids these days can't get away with anything. Their parents always know where they are, I guess, unless the cat tip works. And they're just a little more used to it. It's not as strange to them.
So with feline use aside, one thing that really stuck out to me in your guide was the set of tips you provide near the end of the sort of the main article about checking in with that smartphone wielding child. I thought this was really interesting. And maybe this also is talking about getting them at that age where they, want to share things with you. Could you just talk about those tips on sort of regularly checking in and seeing how things are going?
So kids change so fast. It's wild. At the beginning of the year, you give them a phone. They're great. They're excited. At the end of the year, they have all these issues. Maybe they've picked up from social media, from bullying, from inspo posts on Instagram. You constantly want to be talking to your kid about what they're seeing on their phone, what their worries are. And you want to ask open-ended questions. I don't know if you've ever asked a kid or been asked as a kid how your day was. The answer is like, fine, or stop asking me. So you want to ask them about their feelings, what they're seeing, kind of specific, open-ended things that just lets them chat about whatever they want. And maybe they're worried about a friend who is ignoring them and always staring at their phone. Or, sometimes they'll be like, I don't actually enjoy this platform that I'm on. I'd like to turn it off for a while. And it's just, you can never stop having difficult conversations with your kids. And if you make it a regular habit, maybe they won't think it's so cringe, as the kids say.
I just learned about icks. I don't know if that's not really necessarily for the show, but that was a new term that I learned that the kids are using, where if they, when they don't like something about another person, or there's something that regularly in another person they don't like, it's called an ick. So
women are very familiar.
Okay. So that's like I don't know. I guess I just don't know what an ick is.
a couple dates, he's fine. Third date, you get the ick.
Well, there you go. So I just knew that's what fish get in aquariums, and you have to give them special medicine for their ick.
Little
gills. Now there are men with ick gills. Anyway, let's get back to this. The theme of the piece really does seem to center around communication. With the Surgeon General's kind of vague advice on social media and youth mental health, what is one piece of advice that you would give to parents who are reading this advisory and immediately are going, I need to take away all of the phones from my kids?
Okay, chill. It's going to be fine. Do not let them take their phones into their room at night. Just don't. There's no reason. Get them an alarm clock. They're like, I need to wake up. Kids are waking up and checking their phone. It's interfering with their sleep, and it's having all these trickle down effects. So if you do nothing else, set up a rule where at night that phone is someplace they cannot access it. And honestly, your phone should be someplace you can't access it. So put them together in a little locked box and get a Kindle or a book.
Beautiful. Yes, amen. Don't get me started on blue light, because I'll get going. Anyway, I will give everyone another piece of advice, which is to head over to WashingtonPost.com and check out Heather's great piece. It links to some more articles within that you should also read. Outside of going to the Washington Post, if folks want to follow you online, where should they go to do so?
I'm still on Twitter, man. Like, it's a problem.
It's okay. Everyone else that I've talked to today has said the same thing, so you're fine.
I mean, I'm on Blue Sky. I don't know what it is. I'm on Mastodon. I don't know what that name is. You can also just email me, heather.kelly@washpost.com. Not enough people email me. It's really sad, and I'm kind of lonely. So send me your problems. I'll see if I can fix them.
There you go. If you have a question that needs answered, you can email Heather Kelly. Heather, thank you so much for your time today. Good luck with the cats and the ick, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I have to admit, Heather Kelly is one of my favorites when we were able to get her on the network in one way, shape, or form. Her talking about kind of social media and the impacts of social media really ties in with one of the moments that I zeroed in on with Amanda Silberling from TechCrunch, because this was the year that we saw, the Threads kind of thing emerge, and it was going really hot there for a while, and then it kind of settled down a little bit. But it's really been the year of the Twitter alternatives post Musk takeover, and Amanda had some really interesting insight into that.
Definitely a really interesting moment for the reasons that you're saying, where it's like, how often do we have this opportunity as users of social media to decide collectively, like, what do we want in a platform? What do we not want in a platform? And to be able to push back against bad policies from the existing dominant social networks. Like, I think that we're in a time when the social media user has more power than perhaps we're used to having. And that's very exciting. But I also think it's simultaneously exhausting, because it's like, I have all these accounts on all these new social networks now. And should I be posting on all of them?
Totally.
Should I pick one and hope that one, quote unquote, wins? Should I just sit out and wait? And I think these are questions that a lot of people are having. And even as a writer who covers social media, I'm just like, I don't know. We got to wait and see. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. And do you post the same thing on all platforms, different things on different platforms? I mean, at this point, I've been really trying to kind of invest myself a little bit more in it, because I think over time I kind of started to get complacent when it came to social media. Like, I need less of it in my life. And that might be true, but this current moment has forced me to kind of like reopen my eyes and be like, okay, but what are the strengths here? And as I dive into them, and I've got, in my social media folder on my phone, I've got like 8 different services there that I'm like hopping in and out of. I feel like I need to hire an assistant just to do my social media strategy. Like, it's not easy to keep up with all this stuff. I don't know how you're doing it.
I don't know how I'm doing it either, but I think, one thing to your point about like, what are we using social media for? I think the popularity of Threads shows just how social media is.
Yeah.
Because the reason why people are so excited about Threads is because all of your friends are already there.
Sure.
But then at the same time, it's like, how much do we like our friends versus how much do we not want Mark Zuckerberg to be controlling yet another aspect of our existence?
Yeah, well, it's been really interesting to me, and I speak from firsthand experience in this, as well as kind of reflecting on what's out there. And I think I mentioned this on last week's show, I hate Zuck, I'm doing something else. And then I hate Musk, I'm doing something else, but that something else happens to be back over where Zuck is. And like at a certain point, like, the question that I keep coming around to is like, all right, we talk a big game about caring about this stuff, but at the end of the day, do we really? Because we're over on Threads, we're using it. And, I know I'm using it, and I had sworn off Zuckerberg products a while back. So, years back. So I don't know, I guess I'm just a hypocrite, but here I am. What are you thinking about Threads right now? What's your thoughts as far as like Twitter alternatives, which it seems like we have a sea of these that we're treading through at this point. Threads seems to be the one that, at least at this moment, a week after it was released, has a lot of energy around it. Do you think that's lasting energy based on what we've seen so far?
I think it'll be hard to tell. I know for me personally, I was using it a lot like the first day it came out, and then now I probably haven't posted in a few days, but also, I don't know, life is busy. So that could also be a factor.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think maybe people do like their friends more than they hate Zuck, which is maybe good for society and bad for diversifying technology.
Yeah, no question. So, I mean, and we did dive in pretty deep on Threads last week, so we don't need to go super deep on Threads. That is just one of these. You actually wrote a few weeks ago about one I had not heard of before called Spill. So tell me what I'm missing. What do I need to reserve my username on Spill? What's it all about?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's worth reserving a username on any platform because you never know. Also, it's like there's so many, and that's kind of what we were talking about at the top of the segment. But Spill is a social app founded by two Black ex-Twitter employees, Alfonso Terrell and Davaris Brown, and they are trying to build something that really emphasizes the fact that a lot of the time it's Black people and queer people that are driving culture and like creating all of the new memes. And you think about something like Black Twitter, which refers to just like the community of Black people on Twitter and how much of internet culture has come out of that community that like a lot of people who aren't part of Black Twitter like don't know about. And so as people who used to work at Twitter, who understand the experience of being Black people on social media, they're trying to make Spill a place that caters to the culture makers from the get-go rather than like just making a platform that first all the tech bros join and then later other people find it and kind of like reverse engineer it to make like actual culture happen on there. But I mean, I think with all of these apps, the issue is that people don't know like which one is going to take off. And I think all of these teams are like Spill doesn't have a very big team. Like I think they still have less than 20 people. I think Blue Sky still has a pretty small team. So it's like really challenging for these people to be working so hard to make something so quickly. And so of course these apps are going to like have issues, but I do think that Spill is an example of people capitalizing on something that is missing from social media. And I think that for a lot of Black people and other people that are traditionally marginalized on social media, it's really exciting to have the opportunity to be on a platform that was built with them from the get-go in mind rather than as an afterthought.
Oh, that's fantastic. Right on. I did put my name on the wait list for that. So you can't go right in. You do have to kind of sign up for the wait list to be notified about more. So thank you for that. Now you mentioned Blue Sky. I realize that there's T2, which we'll talk about in a second, which I have given zero attention. Blue Sky I've given a little bit more, but not a whole lot more. Yet it seems like I've certainly talked to people who like they're like that's it for them. They're like, oh yeah, Blue Sky. That's where I'm putting my weight. That's where I'm putting my attention, my time into Blue Sky. Right now only has limited invites. And I'm kind of curious, like, especially when we compare this to Threads and what Threads was able to do. You know, Threads really leveraged the Instagram network in order to give you instant follower count, essentially, an instant base of people to be talking to and to be hearing from. Blue Sky is kind of like the opposite. It didn't leverage anything. It's actually throttling back anyone's ability to jump in there. You got to kind of wait for an invite. Thankfully, I'm thankful that I have an account. I've been able to give it a few invites out, but what's taken Blue Sky so long to kind of like get this going? And by comparison with what Threads was able to do, like, was that not an effective strategy when you put them side by side?
Yeah, well, I guess a big difference is that Meta has a massive staff despite laying off like 20,000 people. That's another story. Mm-hmm. And then Blue Sky is so small, so it's going to take Blue Sky a lot more time to do things. I think another main difference is that Blue Sky is trying to be federated like Mastodon, meaning that people can use the underlying technology to make their own servers. And I think I like Blue Sky as of now. Like, I've had a good time on it. I'm a big proponent of calling Blue Sky posts skeets. That is my personal social movement of choice at the moment. But I do think that I am personally worried on both Mastodon and Blue Sky about I love the idea of decentralized social media in theory, but does this enable people to have an easier time making like Nazi servers or something?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we don't talk about the fact that even Truth Social, Trump's social media app, was built on Mastodon.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
like,
right.
I don't know. I mean, I think like these technologies try to be apolitical, but at the same time, it's like, I'm sure there's a lot more Nazi discussion happening on Truth Social than other apps. And I think it is tricky to figure out, like, how do you give users agency to set their own content moderation rules and community guidelines within their own communities, but then also be like, hey, maybe we shouldn't have a Nazi server.
Yeah. Hey, big idea there. Okay, so let's dive into T2 a little bit, because I am super curious about this. This is one of those that keeps being thrown around. I can't help it. I'm a child of the 80s and 90s, so every time I hear it, I think Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't think social media. Like, what is the deal with T2? Am I actually missing out on anything? And it also, I'll just add on to that. It seems like a lot of these alternatives hinge on a particular thing, like or a particular community of sorts. I think Blue Sky actually has, a very dedicated community. I think a lot of like my professional peers swear by it for some reason, versus like the broader public, everybody, that friends and family hopping in there. What is T2's thing, if you had to summarize it?
I feel like T2 is a lot of tech people. It's still pretty small. I think like Blue Sky, it's a small staff making an app, and they don't want to onboard too many people too quickly, and then just that'll get out of control. I haven't used T2 a ton, but I'm weirdly one of the most followed people on T2.
No kidding, really?
I don't know why. Which it's not even, I don't even have that many followers. It's just that they don't have that many users.
Okay.
But I guess for some reason in their algorithm, I was one of the accounts that people get recommended to follow when they log in. And then I just haven't been using it. But now I'm like, damn, I got to get on my T2 game. I have to speak to my people.
I mean, you got 2,327 followers over on T2. That's
yeah, but I think there's 10,000 users though. So,
okay. That's the opposite side. So T2 is a much more limited audience than it sounds like. Maybe not missing out too much over there.
I also think they're still going to name themselves something different. I think T2 was a placeholder for Twitter too.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know. I mean, it's still so early and still so hard to tell, once T2 opens to the public, will people be like, hey, this is cool? Or will they be like, none of my friends are here?
I mean, the risk right now is that the pool is becoming more and more diluted, that it's hard as a user to really know, I guess touching back at the very beginning of our conversation, it's hard to know as a user which of these services is even worth the time. The only way you really understand that is to get in there and to use it. But I mean, when we've got 10, 20 different services that have all come out purporting to be, maybe not in direct terms, but essentially saying we are the alternative to Twitter that you're looking for. I mean, it's really impossible to know where to have the time and to know where to invest that time into.
Yeah, and I think maybe this is making us question, do we want everyone we know to be on one platform?
Good
is
question.
It maybe better to be on Blue Sky, I'm going to talk about tech. On Threads, I'm going to talk about my weaving and my personal hobbies. But I also think that part of what makes social media interesting is that if you go on my Twitter, you will see me tweeting about tech. You will also see me tweeting about whatever stupid jokes I come up with that have nothing to do with tech. Mm-hmm. And I do think that I like the idea of social media helping us humanize ourselves outside of our LinkedIn personas, which, I mean, I don't know, people are using LinkedIn more too, but I still just see LinkedIn as being people that are this child wanted to build a company and now that child is Mark Zuckerberg, and just very dramatic,
crafting,
I don't know if this makes sense, but there's a cadence and a craft to the LinkedIn post. That's very weird to me.
Yeah, understood. I don't spend much time on LinkedIn at all, and I fully recognize like it's been around forever, and there's a lot of people that swear by it. So hey, you do what works for you. In kind of retrospect, looking at all these different services, I think the thing that I'm always curious about is what are they doing that's different from the rest? Like when we look at Threads, I mean, I guess the thing that Threads did right is what we already said. They leveraged they leveraged the Instagram followers in order to make it an instant hit, essentially. But we are only a week into the great Threads experiment, whatever you want to call it. But it's felt sticky so far. It seems like there's still a lot of engagement and everything like that. Like what is a Threads doing aside from that onboarding win that they had that's different from the rest? Or if there's another service that's really doing something that you're like, you know what, this is what I want out of my replacement or my next social media network. Like, are any of them doing something that you're like, okay, game changer?
Well, right now Threads has no ads, so I think that's great.
Nice.
However, maybe the ads are actually the fact that there isn't actually a feed where you can see who you're following. And so no matter what, like I'm going to go on Threads and I'm going to see like Wendy's posting, which I don't follow Wendy's. I don't need to know what they're posting about, but Threads thinks I do. But as of right now, it's so early that we aren't seeing sponsored posts, and it feels like such a breath of fresh air, even if I am randomly seeing posts from Wendy's. But I don't know. Mark Zuckerberg really wants me to know about like chicken nuggets or something.
Yeah.
But I also think Threads, I don't know. I mean, they seem to be emphasizing creators very strongly, like in the same way that Instagram emphasizes creators. And I think that if they can create a program where creators can get paid on Threads, there hasn't really been a successful way of monetizing these like microblogging platforms like on Twitter. Although I did read that now, I think starting very soon, creators can start like getting paid on Twitter, but I don't trust anything Elon Musk says. So grain of salt, but it's like pre-Musk assuming that this thing actually works. If you have 100,000 followers on Twitter, that gets you $0 in real life. And if Threads can make it so that you can actually make money from posting, then great news for the posters. Yeah. I think it'll have a lot of success if it can figure that out. We'll certainly see. And Amanda Silberling will be covering it all for TechCrunch. Amanda, thank you so much for hopping on with me today to talk a little bit about the current landscape of social media, as confusing as it can be. You're writing a lot about this stuff these days. So obviously people can go to techcrunch.com to find your work there. If they want to find you, what is the social media network that you prefer they find you at, and how can they do so? Oh, man, that's a good question.
Reach into the hat and pull one out.
I'm still hopelessly addicted to Twitter, where I am Silbrights. On Blue Sky, I am at amanda.omg.lol, which is a URL that I do own. It's really a problem for me that I don't have like the same screen name on multiple platforms, because then on Threads / Instagram, I am just Amanda Silberling, but that is too long of a name to fit on Twitter. So I'm kind of stuck.
That is tough.
What is personal branding anymore? I'm everywhere and nowhere. I don't even
know. And does it actually matter? I don't know. If people want to find you, they'll find you. I have the same problem. I'm like Jason Howell in some places, that Jason Howell in other places, because I couldn't get Jason Howell first. Jason Howell 01 in other places. I mean, whatever. The name's in it, right? So eventually, if people want to find you, they will, and they should. Amanda, thank you so much for hopping on with me today. Really appreciate you.
Yeah, it's always fun to come on. So thanks for having me.
All right. We'll talk to you soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Let's, of course, start with the basics, because we do get new listeners to the show. We do get listeners who may not be super steeped in tech like we are. Tell us about OpenAI's GPT technology. Just in general, what is OpenAI's GPT before we even start getting into those numbers of 3 and 4?
Yeah, essentially, it can get confusing. So for those who aren't super familiar, it's essentially OpenAI's large language learning model that powers what we know, what many people know of as ChatGPT, which is their chatbot. It essentially is trained on over 100 billion pieces of tech data from across, or text data, excuse me. I'm in a tech headspace here. Text data from across the internet, and essentially uses that to, when you ask it a question, to predict the next word that comes next. So it essentially just guesses what it thinks is the most likely word to complete a phrase or a sentence. And it essentially has been evolved over time, over the years, to power, like I said, what we know of as ChatGPT, which is how it gets its name.
So it's very smart autocorrect.
Essentially, yes.
Yes.
By guessing, in your predictive text on your phone, when you're guessing what the next word would be, it's a much better version of that because that one isn't super good.
Not great, right? Well, so one of the things that I think is important to understand, and I've seen some confusion here, is a lot of times Chat GPT and then GPT-3, which up to this point has been the sort of system behind it, those get conflated. And so I was hoping that you could explain the difference when we're talking about Chat GPT and we're just talking about GPT itself. What's the difference there?
Right. So the way that I like to think about it is that ChatGPT is the chatbot that we know, where you can go in and ask it questions and it'll respond. GPT is kind of the underlying technology that powers that. So ChatGPT uses what's called actually GPT 3.5 to make things even more confusing with more numbers. It's essentially built on top of GPT-3 and is a fine-tuned version of that. But essentially, the tech itself is GPT, and then the chatbot that we all know and love is ChatGPT, and it uses, like I said, 3.5. And now we have 4, so it kind of continues that evolution.
Got it. So moving on to the update, we saw OpenAI announce GPT-4 and start to kind of show that off. Could you tell us about the difference between GPT-3 and GPT-4? And then we'll dig into some of the details of the two.
Yeah, so it essentially does what ChatGPT does, but a lot better in terms of its language skills and its cognitive reasoning. It can analyze way more text and kind of synthesize it down to kind of whatever you want it to be. So I think it can take up to 25,000 words of text and kind of add as input. It's much better, we've seen, at things like math and at cognitive reasoning. Sometimes you would give the current ChatGPT, you would give it like a logic puzzle or something that requires like a slightly higher level of thinking, and it just wouldn't be able to get there. GPT-4 is there in terms of its cognitive skills. And one thing that it has that ChatGPT doesn't have is that it can take images as input. You can send it a photo, apparently, and it'll be able to describe it and analyze what's in it. That hasn't been publicly released yet, apparently because of fears of it being abused, which kind of speaks to this broader question of responsible AI. But that is something that we've seen a bit in the demos that apparently GPT-4 can do, which is a really huge advancement in terms of understanding, kind of bringing in the visual aspect of it as well.
Yeah, and you talked about sort of the concerns there. The OpenAI has talked about how GPT-4 is quote unquote safer, and that kind of is a broad term that has many different underlying pieces. Can you tell us about what's going on there?
What I think they mean by that is that they say that GPT-4 is 82% less likely to produce a response to something where the content is not allowed. So they have some things like, if we've seen with ChatGPT, if people ask it like information on like how to commit a crime or like tell an offensive joke or something, it'll be like, no, that's not right. I'm not going to do that. We've seen some people be able to kind of jailbreak it, is what they call it, and go around it, which I don't know why people are like going out of their way to try to tell offensive jokes, but it does test the limits of this kind of thing. And so in that way, I guess it can be helpful. But apparently GPT-4 is more trained to kind of not reveal as many of those pieces of content that aren't allowed. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So where before you could more than likely get it to do something that it's not supposed to be doing, now it becomes more difficult. It's going to be more convoluted process if you are going to get it to do something.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. I've been kind of trolling the ChatGPT Reddit, kind of scrolling through it. Kind of where a lot of people test out different things, and already seeing people say that GPT-4 is a little more restrictive, they say, which again can be a good thing if you're trying to avoid harmful content. But that seems to be what OpenAI means by that.
Got it. Now, one of the terms you use in the piece, and it's one of, I find, the most fascinating things about these chat bots or this large language model technology. It's hallucinations. Can you tell us, in terms of AI, what does it mean when an AI is hallucinating?
Yeah, so it's essentially, if you think of what we as humans think of as hallucinating, when you see something and you think you see it and you're sure it's there, but it's actually not there, it's the same for an AI, where it so confidently believes that something is correct and is just wrong about it, and really believes that it's right, even though it's wrong, and that it's not backed up really by its training data, and it can be really confusing. And those are some of the viral examples that went around with ChatGPT of like, oh my God, it believes, XYZ. What? This makes no sense. They say that GPT-4 has less of those and should be a little more accurate, but they still say that it has some problems with hallucinations that they're working to figure out. So those are some of the limits that are going to continue to be tested over these next few weeks, I believe.
Got it. Now, one of the things that OpenAI showed off were some different examples of how GPT-4 works in terms of in comparison to GPT-3. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about some of the examples that they showed in the event, and then also talk about its improved performance on standardized exams, because that was another big factor. Yeah. It seems to be that it's a little more creative than it was before, but yeah, tell us all about that.
Yeah, so in terms of the examples, one thing, it showed off kind of how it can distill a lot of complicated information. This was, I should mention, a demonstration that OpenAI president and co-founder Greg Brockman did after GPT-4 was released, and it was mostly for developers. I'm not a developer, but I still found it super interesting just as a journalist and a user. He showed how it can distill a lot of complicated information and kind of analyze that. He copied, I believe, 26 pages of the US tax code into GPT-4 and asked it a very complicated tax question that I definitely wouldn't have been able to answer on my own. And it pretty much immediately spit out the answer. So that was one example on the text side of things. Then he showed off the image capabilities, which again isn't in any of OpenAI's GPT models up until now. He sent it a photo of a screenshot of a Discord chat that they were using during the demo, and he asked it to describe in painstaking detail what it was describing. He didn't even say whether it was a screenshot or what, but it noticed that it was, and it perfectly described what was in this screenshot. Wow. And then what was the coolest example? Yeah, it was when he basically during the demo took a photo of a scribble, like a mock-up of a website that he wanted to make. Just that it was on a notepad. He sent it a photo and it was like in his handwriting and, just kind of drawn out really quickly, it looked like. And he basically asked it, make a website of this mock-up using JavaScript and HTML. And it immediately output this website, which, was way beyond, I think, my capabilities, at least. It was relatively simple, but it involved a button that you had to click, and it just immediately understood it. And again, this was a demo, so who knows if they tested to make sure that it would be good ahead of time, but it was still really, really cool to instantly see like a little scribble on a piece of paper drawn out, or just created into a website.
Yeah, and
that's really impressive.
That's incredibly impressive. And what I think there is especially impressive is like all of the different contexts that you're talking about, because you've got, and even I remember reading about in that Discord chat, there was a photo, and it was a photo of a squirrel like holding a camera. And so not only did ChatGPT explain in painstaking detail, or not ChatGPT, but GPT-4 explain in painstaking detail what the photo was in general, but then to go on and say, and why is that photo that's in this screenshot or what's funny about this photo? And it was able to provide the context there, which we all know the way that you make a joke even funnier is by explaining it. But even though it may not have a sense of humor, I still find that incredibly impressive.
Yeah, no, and in terms of understanding like the cognitive reasoning around like why it was humorous for a squirrel to be taking a photo of a nut that it had found, like that is something that ChatGPT never would be able to do in its current form. So it was really, really cool to see that. And I've seen in terms of the coding ability, that is something that I should have mentioned earlier that is much more sophisticated on GPT-4. People I've already seen on Twitter being able to make like snake games to play on their computer, or like a little game of like electronic Pong, just immediately being able to turn it around with GPT-4. So that's been really, really cool. But on the standardized tests angle, one thing that was kind of went viral with ChatGPT after it was released was people kind of putting it to the test of like, oh, I made ChatGPT take a Wharton exam, or I made it take the bar and see how it did. This time around, OpenAI put GPT-4 to the test before it was released and kind of detailed all of those results in its report, which was really interesting compared to how ChatGPT would do. And it did much better on the bar. It was scored in the 90th percentile of the bar compared to ChatGPT, which was in the 10th percentile. Did much better on calculus. It got a 4 on the AP Calculus BC exam compared to the 1 that ChatGPT got. One thing where it didn't do as well, though, which is really important to still know, was writing in English. It got a 2 on the AP English and language literature and composition exams, and which was the same as what ChatGPT got. So obviously that requires a little more original thinking and writing. So that's kind of an important limitation to note when it comes to these large language AI models that are essentially scraping existing text that's on the internet and kind of repurposing them.
Wow, that's fascinating though to see it do as well as it did on some of those exams. And even there was the LEET code. Is that what it's called? The LEET code. Exam?
Yes. The LEET code exam is essentially something, a course and test that coders can take to like test their skills, and they have different versions of it. ChatGPT did pretty poorly, especially on the advanced version. GPT-4 did better on the easy version. It got like a 31 out of 41, out of a possible 41. But in terms of the advanced one, which apparently requires a little bit more original thinking and a little more being more abstract, it got like a 3 out of 45 or something like that. So it still did very poorly on the advanced coding. So obviously room for improvement there.
Absolutely. Now, will folks be able to use GPT-4 by way of ChatGPT, or is the service still using and will continue to just use GPT 3.5 as you point out? Will we all eventually get access to GPT-4, or is this only going to be an API accessible technology?
Yeah, so right now anyone can get access to GPT-4 if they're a paid subscriber of what's called ChatGPT Plus, which costs $20 a month, and it essentially will provide you with access to GPT-4 in the similar chatbot context. So essentially, yes, but right now, if you're not a paid subscriber, you only still get the regular ChatGPT.
Got it. Now, as we've covered on the show in the past, Microsoft, of course, invested billions of dollars into OpenAI, and even went as far as to add OpenAI's tech to its Bing search engine. My question is, do we know which model Microsoft is using with its Bing search and that sort of chat feature? Has it gotten access to 4? Is it on 3? Will it eventually get 4? Do we know anything about that?
Yeah, this is a great question, because when Bing Chat was originally released, it was kind of a mystery of like which model it was using. Bing called it its like Prometheus model, I believe. And people speculated that it was GPT-4 because it was way more advanced than what people had seen on ChatGPT. And this week, Microsoft confirmed that, in fact, it has been running on GPT-4 this entire time. So we kind of have already gotten a sneak peek at kind of some of its real world applications and what it can and can't do. And obviously some of its limitations as well, as we've seen Bing Chat kind of go off the rails a little bit. And so they've already had to limit it a little bit. So it might have been a bit of a test run for GPT-4. But short answer, yes, it's on GPT-4.
Got it. And then my last question for you, you actually wrote a piece over on Semaphore called "Should We Be Polite to ChatGPT?" So I thought it would be fitting to ask you, should we be polite to ChatGPT? Essentially, what did you find in kind of looking into this question? And of course, as you mentioned, going through Reddit and seeing how everybody's trying to poke and prod to make it do different things.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's no singular right answer. I guess I can speak from a personal point of view, and I'm curious to hear yours as well, which I'll think. But I'm from the South. I'm in Atlanta here. I grew up, always use your manners, please and thank you. And so I would find myself with ChatGPT always saying, thank you if it gave me a really good answer, or if I had a kind of complicated question, I would be like, please, do this, sorry. And I found that so many people had that same experience where they just noticed that they couldn't help themselves but be polite to ChatGPT. But since writing that article, actually, I did a little bit, read more on the research and talked to some experts about it and learned some of the limitations with treating these bots as if they're like sentient beings that we should, use normal human manners to. It's kind of a lot of experts say it's kind of a distraction from focusing on the issues of like, why are they acting the way they're acting, or like who programmed them, or like how they were made, rather than just seeing them as these sentient bots. And we should use it more as a tool rather than like a friend. And so that's how I've started to see it more. And I'm not outwardly rude to it, because I think that's even weirder, but like some of the people on Reddit. But I no longer use like additional niceties like,
Thank you.
And yeah.
Interesting. So I'm from the Midwest. I come from Missouri, and I definitely had that same mindset. When it does a great job, I say thank you.
Yeah.
There have even been some times where I've felt bad asking it a certain question because it's like, oh, that's a really difficult thing for it to understand. I don't know if it's going to get that. And I'm like, oh man, I don't even want to make it, challenge it so much. And I have pulled away from that specific thing, but I still do say, I guess I never went into it doing the pleases, but always if it gave a good answer, I did say thank you afterward.
It's like a like on a social media post.
Yeah, it's just
like expressive appreciation. A thumbs up, a little reaction. Yeah,
it gives a pretty canned response, I feel, whenever you do say thank you. So I probably would get to a point, if I used it that often, I would get to a point where I would stop doing that. But I've always had a problem though, because even though it's not a real thing, it's still in my head. Treat others as you want to be treated, and others could be human or otherwise. You know what I mean? You treat your pets how you want to be treated. And so that is still in my mind, and it still makes me uncomfortable. I remember I had a family friend staying with me, and they did not have an Echo at home. I had an Echo, and I came downstairs, and the Echo had not done what they had expected it to do. And so they were cursing at it jokingly, haha, funny. And I was like, no, let's not do that, please. Thanks. Because not only is it just, I think, odd behavior for a human being, but also, in the case of Echo at the time, Amazon, of course, was collecting certain responses, particularly those that failed. And so I'm like, somebody's going to end up hearing that and think that this household is just ridiculous. So there's always that in the back of my mind too. Yeah.
And it was a common refrain on Reddit that, we should be nice to the bots because they're going to become sentient one day and remember who was nice and who was mean to it. Obviously mostly a joke, but it's
you're creating a good habit.
That's what I think it is. I think
it's
up
to a point to where there will be a point, I'm imagining somewhere down the line, I don't know when, but somewhere down the line where these things and these AIs like occupy some sort of a humanoid presence. And we will feel the need to say thank you and please, So maybe it's just creating good habits.
Exactly. And research has shown that people are more likely to treat bots if they're more conversational and act more human-like, to treat them like humans. So I think it speaks more to the tech itself that like, wow, this is becoming really good if so many people are treating it like it's a friend or like a human.
I mean, I've got a date with GPT-4 later today, so it'll be awkward when it doesn't show up. But no, thank you so much for your time today, JD. Of course, folks can head over to semaphore.com to check out the great work that you're doing. But if they want to follow you online, where can they go to do that?
Yeah, Twitter's the best place, at JD Capelouto, which is my long last name, JD Capelouto on Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you. We appreciate you.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Arguably, that is the biggest story of the year, going from GPT-3 to GPT-4. I was happy to have JD Capelouto stop by from Semaphore to explain what that meant. And then as this year has gone on, to see GPT-4 even continue to grow has been pretty wild. I can't wait to see what's in store for next year, honestly.
Well, and then also watching how the competitors, the landscape for the first year was so hyper-focused on OpenAI and ChatGPT because they were kind of there to ignite all of this. But now we're really starting to see some true competition as far as what they're all capable of. Gemini, recent
Meta,
news anyways.
We're seeing a lot.
So yeah, super interesting. This year has been fascinating for AI, and it's only going to continue.
Fascinating for AI, and fascinating seeing these little trends take place, and then finally seeing kind of think the overall victor of the year, which has been artificial intelligence.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for tuning in to this year's Best of 2023. I will be back in 2024, hopefully to bring you lots more great stories that'll make it into next year's version. Jason Howell, it's good to have you here.
Yeah,
and
good to see you too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Listeners of this program get an ad-free version if they're members of Club Twit. $7 a month gives you ad-free versions of all of our shows, plus membership in the Club Twit Discord, a great clubhouse for Twit listeners. And finally, the Twit Plus feed, with shows like Stacy's Book Club, The Untitled Linux Show, and more. Go to twit.tv/clubtwit, and thanks for your support.